Hello and welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Wendy J. Haney. Thanks so much for joining me. Today, I'm going to show you how to make the 5-spot quilt block. Yep, I'd never heard of this one, but as browsing the internet looking for some cool blocks, I came across it and thought, wow, what a perfect block to share you, and you'll gain some skills in a variety of squares that go in the quilt block. This block is actually a 9-patch because it's made up of 3 by 3 squares. I'm working with a 12-inch finished block size, which means each of these is going to be 4.5-inch unfinished. And we're really only working with 2 different types of blocks. We've got our corners, our Mary's triangle, and then everything else in the middle and around the edges are a square and a square, or sometimes called a diamond square unit. So I'm going to show you how to make each of these, and then you'll be able to put it all together and have your 5-spot block. I am working with just 4 fabrics. This could also be done scrappy, it could be done with more fabrics, your choice, because I will give you a coloring sheet that you can use and some layouts that you could use with the 5-spot, because there are a lot of possibilities to put this block together and have very different look in whatever quilt you put together based on your fabric choices. So let's get going and learn how to make Mary's triangle. Now, for Mary's triangle, I have 3 colors. We have our larger triangle out of my green, my smaller triangles out of my pink, and my square out of my multi. Because I'm going to need a number of these squares, I actually need 4 for each 12-inch block. And with this method that I'm showing you, I can get 2 of these Mary's triangles out of 1 set. I find the easiest thing to do is cut my fabric in strips. I need 2.75 by 5.25 inch of my multicolor fabric for my square. So I cut my strips 2.75. And I am giving you measurements that are going to be able to give you wiggle room to be able to trim up this block. If you go look at my Mary's triangle video from last month, I've got a link up here, that will also show you the method to cut your pieces of fabric exactly to the size you need, and there is no trimming up. I wanted to have a little better accuracy than I was getting with that method, because there's a lot of places where the block connects to other ones where accuracy is so critical in this one. So I'm making my pieces of fabric 1/4 inch larger than they need to be so I can trim up. So my multicolor fabric, I cut strips of 2.75 inches and I subcut it into 5.25 inch lengths. I need 2 of those. For my pink, for my little triangles, I need 3.75 inches wide by 5.25 inches long. So I cut my strips 3 3/4 and then subcut it into 5.25. And then my larger triangle, I'm pretty sure I have this right, is 5 by 6. So because I've got some other things I needed, a 5-inch strip is often used, so I did a 5-inch strip and I'm subcutting it into 6-inch lengths. Okay, so we're gonna set aside our large triangle and we're gonna work with these 2 first. We're going to put our get these right sides up. We're going to put our narrower strips on top of our wider strips. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch on the long side of those. Now that you have your 2 3/4 inch strip attached to your 3 1/4 inch, 3 3/4 and 2 3/4 inch strips, then you're going to make sure your, don't have it this way, have it this way, because we're going to cut this in half. cut this in half, and that's about 2 5/8 of an inch. I make sure my seam line is nice and even there. And because we have wiggle room, this will keep things straight. Cut it in half. Now you have 2 pieces. What you want to do then is put it back together where your squares are opposite. So we're going to sew it together like this. And you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on the long side. And then when you get that done, you're going to press it. You're going to trim. It's going to be like this. You're going to have it sewn together, and you're going to cut a snip right there down to the seam in the middle. You don't have to worry too much. Don't cut the seam, but you can get as close as you want because this is going to get trimmed away. And then you're going to press it so that when you press it, you can see the intersection of your seams here. Don't press it this way where it hides that intersection. So depending on how you did your pressing, the first part depends on which direction you're pressing your seams. You want to see your stitches. Now that we have this done, now we need to draw lines that show us how to cut these in half so that we end up with our 2 Mary's triangles. Now, you can use a companion ruler. I've got the companion angle, and it is a 45-degree angle. That is what's important when you're using a triangle ruler. Or you can use a good old-fashioned omni-grid ruler with the center 45-degree angle. In this case, I position it this way, and I'm going to put the edge of my companion angle on the left-hand side of my block. I'm going to slide it up, and I want the edge of the angled ruler to intersect with that seam where my angle is. And we're going to just even that up. Don't worry about it intersecting exactly on this edge. It won't. It doesn't need to because we're making things a little bit larger than we need, and we're going to trim it up. So we're going to mark that. Key thing is having it straight here and intersecting with your seam. Okay? Then you're going to flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. This time I will show you how I use my omni-grid. So in this case, I put the omni-grid on the 45-degree line on the left-hand side, and just like with the companion ruler, I get it matched up where the edge of my ruler intersects with my seam there. And whoopsie, that's the tricky thing. Don't let your fabric move when you're doing this. And we're going to draw that and get our sewing line. Okay, now we have that. Now, I told you you needed a 5 by 6 inch for your larger triangle. You can actually get by with about 4.75 inches by 6. So in this case, because we're trimming, it really doesn't matter. But I'm going to put that on top there, and as you can see, I've got plenty extra around the edges because I cut this larger than I needed. But a 4.75 by 6 will be sufficient for the piece of fabric that's for your larger triangle here. You're going to position that on there, and I highly suggest that you pin this to keep things from moving around. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew on these lines that you drew. So you want your needle in the middle, and you're going to sew. And what I suggest you do is sew, just hedge towards the inside. Hedge this way. So like 1 thread length away. And that'll kind of compensate for when you fold it over and press it for your seam and the width of your thread. So head towards the middle. You're going to sew here, and then you're going to sew there. And then we'll be ready to cut them apart, and you're going to have 2 Mary's triangles. Now that we have our lines stitched, then it's time to cut it apart. Get a ruler that's long enough to extend past your block, and I just line the 1/4 inch mark on my ruler with the seam I sewed, cut it, flip it over and do the other side. This way, instead of just cutting down the middle and leaving it, you'll end up with your normal 1/4 inch seam allowance there instead of a lot of extra bulk that you don't need. And then you're going to take it to the ironing board and press it. So you press, I generally press to the larger triangle because there's fewer seams. And you're going to want to press that nicely, and you should have a nice little point there where your square intersects with your larger triangle. Okay, I have one I've already pressed because you're going to want to press it before you trim it up. Now it's time to trim it up. And because we went with larger sizes, you're going to have to trim a decent amount, which allows you to make it perfect. This is a 4.5 inch unfinished block, which means this square is half of that. So it's got a seam, and so 4.5 divided by 2 is 2 1/4. So that is what you need this square to be, a 2 1/4 inch square. If you're working with a larger block or smaller, that's how you can do the math to figure out what this square needs to be, because you need to know the size of this square right now in this unfinished block in order to trim it up correctly. So your unfinished size, 4.5 divided by 2 is 2 1/4, which is the size of that square. Now I got my handy dandy Omni Grid ruler, and because this needs to be 2 1/4, I'm going to line up my 2 1/4 this way. So this is my 2 1/4 mark, and this is 2 1/4. And you know what? I wonder if I flip this, if I can get, nope. I was hoping I could get my angle in here also. Actually, you could. It's a little more confusing, so we're not going to do it that way. Sorry for the distraction there. I'm going to put this on here. So I'm going to line up my 2 1/4 there. Now, as I said, this is going to be squared up to 4 1/4, which means even though you don't have an angled line, your edges, your points here should be at the 4.5 mark of your ruler, because when you flip it, you're going to trim 4.5. So this should give you plenty of room to trim. Mine's like 4 3/4 right now. My 4.5 mark is right there on that point, that intersection of my seams, and up here it's the same. That way I know 2 1/4, 2 1/4, 4.5, 4.5 means I'm properly trimming this block up such that it will be properly squared and my angle and my squares are where they need to be. Then I can come back and line up 4.5, 4.5 all the way around, because I can use my edge that I just trimmed up to trim it up. And there we go. Now we have our 4.5 inch unfinished block. We have 2 of these. You're going to need to go make 2 more of them that are identical. Repeat the same process and you'll be good to go. And then you have your 4 corners for your 5-spot block. Now we're going to move forward and work on making the square in, there it is, our square in a square, our diamond in a square, whatever you want to call it. We're going to make these next. Now that we have our 4 corners done with Mary's triangle, we're ready for our square in a square. We have 4 of them that are identical. In my case, they have pink on the outside, multi on the inside, and our larger square on the inside is orange. My center square, though, is all the same corner triangles in green with an orange center. These are all going to be made the exact same way. There are multiple ways to make your square in a square. I'll put a link below, or Kevin will probably put a link, I never can remember which way to point, to the other video I have of showing you 2 methods to do a square in a square. Today, I'm going to use Deb Tucker's square in a square ruler. And in this case, because it's so important for us to have these very, very well done and accurate, because we have a lot of seams connecting things together to make the bigger 5-spot block, I want them to be as accurate as possible. And this method allows me to do that. And yes, that does mean I need a custom ruler. As I said, another video shows you how to do it without a custom ruler. It's nice with her ruler here. It allows me to see the size I need for my center square. Over here, it says based on the finished square size, what size to cut other smaller squares that we are going to cut into half in triangles. So in this case, your center square, I apologize, mine is green with the pink that I'm showing you here. The center square is not a really, really pretty size. So that's why this ruler comes in very handy. Her newer rulers actually tell you what size strips to cut, and then you're going to square them up with this ruler. So mine is an older ruler and it doesn't have that. But with a little measurement, I figured out I needed 3.5-inch strips of my center square fabric, which happens to be orange. So I have that here, and then I put this ruler on top of it that says center square for 4-inch finished blocks. And it looks like I need to square up this edge a little bit before we do that. It looks a little cockeyed, if you will. Get rid of that pin. I'm going to just square it up because cutting is important for accuracy. Now I can put my fancy ruler on top of it. Center for 4-inch square. And it's still a little. There we go. So all we do is trim it up a little bit here. And now I have the exact size that I need for my center. And I'm going to make sure I keep that right side up. So I know what color is right side up. So now we need the center square and 4 around the edges, which means I need 5 of these. So I have my 5 center squares cut per my ruler. The ruler stated on the side that if I have a 4-inch finished block that I'm going to be working with, that I need to cut my squares that I'm going to use for the triangle portion, I need to cut those 3 1/4. And so I needed 4. This will help. And if you're going all scrappy, that is great. I need 4 of the multicolor because I can use 1 square for each set of my square and a square, and I need 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's my 4 squares. That is my 5 orange for my centers. I have pink for my 4 outside square and a squares, which means I need 4 pink 3 1/4-inch squares, and my middle one is unique, and I'm using green for my outside triangles, so I need 2 of those. There we go. I am all set to go with the pieces that I need to have cut out. As I said, you can go scrappy, whatever you want. Now each of these, the orange, the middle ones, set those aside. You are not going to touch those. Your middle ones, you're going to cut in half. And I love my Omni Grid. I have an angled line in the middle, which makes it very easy. And you should be, if you cut these square, you should just be able to go corner to corner without having to line anything up. But it just goes to show sometimes. So you're gonna cut your 3 1/4 inch triangle, or your 3 1/4 inch squares, all in half. Okay, I have my green ones ready for the middle, so I'm going to set my others aside, grab one center triangle, set the rest aside. What you're going to do is I like to take my square and fold it. Make sure I've got that right side up. Yeah, I do. Fold it in half and just crease it. I crease it with my fingernail so it has a crease in it to show me the center. I do the same the other way. And sometimes these do get lost when I get pressing, especially the second set. Then I take my triangles and I do the same thing. Some people will eyeball it. Well, heck, I can't even cut a straight line with a knife when cutting bread, so I am not going to wing it. And I'm making sure I know the right side is up on this fabric. It's kind of weird. So there we go. So I have those. So 2 of them I set right on top of my square. And actually, I'm going to flip it over. I want my square on top when I'm doing my seams, because the square is the most accurate piece of all of this. So I'm going to line up my centers. And as you can see, you have plenty on your edges, so you're going to be good. And I buried my pins. So I am going to pin that. I'm going to flip it around and do the same thing, making sure right sides together. I'm going to put this together. Pin it so they don't move. You're going to take this, and it moved when I pinned it. You're going to take this to the sewing machine and using the edge of your square as your basis for determining your 1/4 inch. Your square is the most accurate piece when you're doing this. So 1/4 inch from the edge on both sides. And then we're going to take those to the ironing board and press them before we come back and put on the other 2 triangles. I have my first 2 triangles on and I have them pressed. In this case, I pressed to the outside. Yeah, that's what I did. One thing you might find come in handy is this purple thing, or some device that you can use that as you get to the end. So when you're sewing and you get to the end here, I have a tendency when I'm sewing these on, this corner slips on me because I can't hold it. So it's very helpful if you get your little purple thing on there and hold it down to keep this from swerving and getting out of whack for you. Okay, I've already got these folded, so I'm going to match those up with my center again. If when you press this you lose your center crease, no big deal. Just fold it in half again. You can still see your edges and mark that up again. Not a problem in the least. And as you can see, you really do have plenty of wiggle room in this anyway. Ouch. Stabbed myself. So we're going to do that. Once again, put your triangles. I normally used to have the tendency, because the triangles are smaller, I would put the triangles on top, but it's more important for you to have the square on top so you can use that sight line, that line of your square for your seam. And crooks. Okay, I think This green is really hard to tell right side from wrong side. As usual, you're putting right sides together. So I'm going to pin that, go to the sewing machine, stitch a 1/4 inch all the way from the edge out here, all the way across on both sides. Use your purple thing as necessary to keep your seams from, wigging out there on the side. Then get that done, do a nice pressing job, and then we will come back and use the ruler to trim this up. Now that you have your block, your center block, with your 4 triangles sewn on, as you can see, it's plenty big, bigger than the 4.5 inch unfinished size that we need. So now we come back to our square 2 ruler and we size it up. Over on this side of the ruler is where it shows you to square it up. So we have a solid line here that says 4.5 inches. Great. That's our 4.5 inches for the outside edge that we're going to trim. The cool thing though is in the middle it has a dotted line that shows you where your center square should be. Otherwise, just trying to square up with the outside, well, it'd be really easy to get it kittywampus. So this is important to have your center all nice. And it makes sure that your edges are going to be a 1/4 inch from your center, so your edges of your center square don't get chopped off. Now, I am not perfect. Mine does not perfectly match. It's pretty doggone close though. So if you find that you're really struggling with getting this middle to be pretty close or completely close, accurate, if it's not, you might want to look at your 1/4 inch seam and figuring out where is it off. And if your square in the middle is too big, it's way outside this dotted line, that means you're not taking enough of a 1/4 inch seam. Your seam is too small. Mine is just a tad on the inside of that dotted square, which means my 1/4 inch is a tad too big. I need to be a little more accurate, but close enough. None of us is perfect. And my 4.5 inch edge here, plenty of room to trim, and making sure that your little X's here are at your corners. So we're going to trim that up, flip it around, and in this case, your cut edge, you should be able to put it right on your 4.5 inch over here and trim it up and not have to do any resetting of anything, because you want this finished, this square, to be a 4.5 inch cut out. There we go. I now have a perfect square in a square that is 4.5 inch unfinished. I can now go and do the rest of my square in a squares. This one was easy. I'm using the same fabric all the way around. My next one though, actually my next several, are going to have pink on one side. Make sure I keep pink on one side. Here, hang on. Clean this up. They all have pink on one side and multi on the other. So as you can tell, it's important to pay attention depending on how you want yours to lay out. The two different colors are opposite of each other. So we're going to cut, I'm going to get these cut in half. Making sure I'm keeping my right sides up. I really should learn to pick out fabric that's easier to tell. Right side from down, wrong side. Okay. So there's my center square. We always put our triangles on opposites. Opposites. So in this case, this will be really easy. Pick your pink for one side and pick your multi for the other side. That'll be really, really easy. If you're going super scrappy with this, then grab one for each side and you're good to go. So just remember that when you're putting this together in this layout, you're putting on opposite colors of your triangles at the same time. Okay, now get those all done and then we're going to come back and put it all together. Okay, I now have all the little blocks to make my big 5-spot block. So now we're ready to lay it out. Usually start with the middle, and then I know my Mary's triangle goes in the corner, and in what I'm doing, my large triangle's towards the inside. And then we have our other triangles, and there I've got the pink on the outside. Okay, now, with that said, you can do this any way you want. Maybe you think it would look really cool with the pink on the inside. Little bit different look. It all depends on your colors and whether you're going scrappy or traditional colors, fabrics or whatever. I also, I'm going to flip it back to the way I plan on doing it, had debated about this. I inadvertently made a middle one where I put a pink in instead of an orange. I'm actually kind of partial to that. I think it kind of looks cool. So you've got that or back to the original. It's all up to you how you want to lay out this square as far as your fabrics are concerned. It would look very, very different. And I don't know if it still would be considered a 5-spot if you put your squares in the middle. Yeah. Oh, well, that's kind of cool. I'm looking at it at the camera and going, yeah. Anyway, go back to the original. You flip and turn, take photos. That's what I've learned, is I lay it out like this, and then I flip it. I take a photo of it. I get my camera out. I take a photo of it. Flip it around some more, take another photo, because sometimes I really need to see it, right after each other and go, which one do I like best? We're gonna stick with this. Now that I've got it laid out, we are ready to put it together. And we're gonna either work in rows or columns. I guess, yeah, it really doesn't matter, but we can do this, right sides together, flip those. I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch. Then I'm going to come back, I'm going to open those up, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to put these on there. Or in that regards, I'll probably take them all to the sewing machine. And if I lay them out right, I'll have them, if I put that on the bottom, that there, and then these together, in that order, and I pin them, I can pick them up at the sewing machine and go bing, 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 sew them together and have them all set to go. Then we come back and we take our columns and we're going to sew our columns together. Something I forgot to mention, when I'm sewing my blocks together, I make sure that the block that has the point, so it's my my square in a square block, is on the top. So I'm putting these right sides together and I'm going to pin them this way. So I stitch my 1/4 inch seam this way. I have that point right there because that's where I want to make sure my 1/4 inch seam hits and doesn't go past it. If it goes past it, then I'm going to cut off my corner. So I'm going to do that on all of my pieces. Now this one, this is my middle one, So I've got a square on a square going on top of a square and square. So, yep, you're just gonna assume you have everything trimmed right, and so you've got one on top of the other. And this one, we've got our Mary's triangle going on top of a square and a square, so I'm gonna flip it and make sure that I can see that seam so that I can hit that spot and not cut off my point. I now have my columns done. And if you're gonna do the pickup method, like I mentioned, be very careful with making sure you don't twist things around. I've decided I'm safer to pin them at the table. So come back, ensure I've got the blocks right, and sew again. Yeah, seam ripper was involved. What I suggest you do is, this is where your biggest bulk is gonna be here. And so it's going to be the same no matter which direction you press your seams. But here you will have less of a bump, if you will, if you press towards the big triangle. So I would press your outdoor rows, press out towards your big triangles, and therefore your center row you're going to press in. That way, and I'm going to go press those, that way when you put them together, you're going to be able to nest your seams with one going down and the other going up. And then, let's see. In this case, I would make sure your center row is on top because that is the one that has your 3 square and a squares where you want to hit your points on those. Whereas here, on this one, you've got 2 big triangles where it won't matter. So, put those together, sew, come back, then take this whole thing and come over here and sew, and then we'll have a very pretty block when we're done. And there we have it, the 5-spot block. Yes, it's very pretty. I love my colors. It could be very scrappy. I am going to now go and put some layouts together on a piece of paper, do some coloring to see what kind of options you have to put things together. Here's my first block I did, so we can do things where, yeah, in this case, our pinks match, and we'll end up with a 4 patch in the middle. Yeah, I think changing your colors up and maybe combine one block with one color layout. So maybe in this block I have my pinks on the outside, but if another block I flipped it the other way around, I would have a different layout by mixing blocks with slightly different layouts. There you go. Now you know how to make the 5-spot block. You learned how to make the Mary's triangle and a square and put it all together. When I pressed towards the outside in this one. You might decide you want to wait to do your final pressing until you figure out how you want to lay things out so your seams can be pressed appropriately for matching them up. This is also a nice, because we laid it out here, we don't have a lot of bulk in the middle, so we don't need to pinwheel them. There we go. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and have a great day.